Court Reporter with Stovall and Associates.
Hi, welcome back to Court Reporter with Stovall and Associates. I'm your host, Mike Iglinski. Tonight's guest is attorney Gary Milton. He's with our law firm here in town. So anyway, we were just discussing bankruptcy, and we're going to go into some of the forms of bankruptcy that are possible, and also how one person would be able to file for bankruptcy. So one of the things we were discussing during the commercial break was the means test. Could you tell us exactly what is the means test?
Sure. The means test basically is it's a test that determines whether one is eligible for a Chapter 7. Not everyone can file a Chapter 7. If you're making too much money, and there's some other variables as well, you may not be able to file a 7, and you might be pushed into a Chapter 13. Mm-hmm. And so that's basically what the means test is. Sometimes the means test doesn't apply, and it doesn't apply if the individual who's filing for bankruptcy is making less than the median income in the state of Nevada.
Okay.
And the median income, it changes. It's a product of the census. Right now, or at least the latest figures I have, if you're making $46,151, excuse me, if you're making under that, $46,151, you automatically qualify for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, mm-hmm. and the means test won't come into play. If you're filing jointly, you and your wife or your husband are filing, then the income is $60,234. So if you're making less than that, the means test doesn't even come into play, and you automatically qualify for a 7.
Okay.
So that's kind of how that.
So for the people that are making, say, above that amount of money, and they do think that bankruptcy is right for them, could you give us an example of like the means test of pushing somebody into, say, a Chapter 13?
Sure. Well, if someone came in and they were making more than that, mm-hmm. Then we would run the means test, and it's a form. It's a matter of plugging in several figures. The individual would have to give us a lot of their financial information. We plug it in. So
income as far as assets, liquid cash.
Sure.
Certain types of debt.
Sure.
Okay.
All that stuff. It's fairly complicated, but out would come whether or not they could file for a Chapter 7.
Okay.
And so that's basically how that works.
Well, that leads into, so obviously it sounds like if you have to prove yourself to file under Chapter 7 bankruptcy, could you give us what's the difference between a 7 and a 13, and why are people looking to file a 7? Sure.
Well, there's advantages to both. They both have their pros and cons. In a 13, one of the biggest differences is that you're going to come up with a payment plan.
Okay.
And so every month you'll be making a payment to a trustee, mm-hmm. who's assigned to your case, mm-hmm. and that trustee will take that money and distribute it to your creditors. The payment will be based on how much income you're making. And that's another thing, is in order to file for a Chapter 13, you need to be making income. If you're unemployed, you don't have any income, you're not eligible for a 13.
Okay.
So you have to have some sort of income, and you and the trustee will agree to a plan. It's either going to be a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan. So over that period of time, mm-hmm. every month you're going to be sending a check to the trustee.
So when you start talking about this amount of money that the trustee is going to distribute to your creditors as an intermediary, what's the is there actually debt negotiated, or is it the original amount of money that was owed to the creditors? It's just being partitioned off in certain payments.
Well, after that 3 to 5 years, whatever your plan requires, then you'll be given a discharge of your debt. So some of your creditors won't be paid in full.
Oh, okay.
Over that period of time, but the individual is making an effort according to what their income is, and some of their creditors will receive some of the money, if not all of the money, mm-hmm. But not all will. And in a Chapter 7, basically it's much quicker, it's much easier, because basically you say to the court, here's my assets, here's my debts, And if there's any non-exempt assets, like we spoke about before, then the trustee is going to sell those and distribute to creditors. Again, typically people won't have any assets for the trustee to get at. Sometimes they do, but typically no. And then that debtor will receive a discharge of his debt. There's no payment to a trustee, and it is fairly quick. You just get your discharge, and your creditors aren't paid.
So then you're really able to turn the page at that point.
Sure, and you get your fresh start.
Okay. Well, one of the things, again, that people have a lot of, there's actually two issues that we see a lot with people calling in about bankruptcies, a lot of questions. One is the damage to their credit score and what it's going to do to it. And I know that's speculative. I know it's hard to say. And then two, as far as people are always wondering about payment, because typically when they're in the situation where they're looking to file bankruptcy, it's hard for them to pay an attorney to represent them in a bankruptcy. So, well, first thing, could you speak to the credit aspect of as far as filing bankruptcy?
Sure. If you file for bankruptcy, it will be reported on your credit probably for 10 years. By law, the credit agencies can have it on your credit report for 10 years. But in some ways, it can help you to get loans. And that is because when a lender's looking at whether or not they're going to give you a loan, they're going to look at how much debt you have currently.
So it's like the debt to income ratio.
Sure.
Okay.
And after you file for bankruptcy, your debt, or a lot of your debt's going to be discharged, and so it'll be gone, and so that income to debt ratio is going to improve. So in that way, it makes you more attractive to a lender. But it does hurt. I mean, if you have a bankruptcy on your credit report, and again, it'll be on there for probably 10 years. That's going to hurt your ability to get credit. But it's not impossible.
It's not impossible. It's just it shouldn't be looked as the first option. But sometimes when people do have to go through the bankruptcy, it's not the end of the world.
Sure. Right. Exactly. And that's what bankruptcy is for. It's to give people a fresh start. And as you mentioned at the beginning of the segment, we are in tough times. The economy is not very good right now, and a lot of people are in some bad circumstances at no fault of their own. Right. And that's what the bankruptcy process is to do, is to help people get that fresh start, and that's what it does. Right.
Right. We have to take another quick commercial break. We'll be back with our last segment. We're going to talk about debts that can be discharged, and then also a little bit about Chapter 13 if you don't make the Chapter 7. So anyway, we'll be right back after this commercial.
Court Reporter with Stovall and Associates.